Hello, everyone. Welcome back for our first episode of 2022. We're going to be following up on last week's episode, and we're going to be doing a SWOT analysis for financial independence. Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is Choose FI.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, very excited to dive into this week's episode talking about a SWOT analysis for financial independence, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. Yeah, this is our first episode of 2022, though actually the second one we've published, right? You and I took about 3 weeks off for the holidays, which was wonderful. So yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
It took me just a half second to catch up to you on that one. You were absolutely right. It's the amazing thing about recording an episode a week or two ahead of time. That you're exactly right.
And it is funny though, right? Because for years we were like months ahead in our recording, and for the last 2 years, this has been kind of a just-in-time type thing, right? We record like the Wednesday prior to the Monday release. So yeah, it's kind of unusual for us nowadays to have a couple of weeks off.
Well, we're going to be hopping into the strengths, weaknesses, the opportunities, and threats. But I think, if we're going to talk about opportunities, I just wanted to share with you and with the audience, really a tax opportunity that I had not latched on to this entire time. It's just slipped by me for my, 30 plus years of existence.
I'm somewhat scared right now, John.
Dude, to be honest with you, you totally should be. I don't know how this slipped by me. It popped up in our Facebook group and also saw it on Reddit as well. I actually didn't think it was real. Then it was confirmed by the NBC, and I finally took that and went to go check it out on irs.gov. The IRS has actually provided guidance for us on how we should be declaring income from stolen goods and illegal activities. So, yeah, I think, we've had Sean Mullaney, the FI tax guy, on the show many, many times, and he's never really given, our audience guidance on what they should be doing with, illegal gains, stolen goods and illegal gains. So here it is. I just want to remind everybody, as we go into tax season, going into April here, when that happens, do not forget to declare income from stolen goods and illegal activities. As you're winding down the year, maybe we're cleaning out our drawers, emptying the receipts. Do not forget about, the lawn ornaments that you stole off your neighbor's front lawn, and you need to value them accurately. If you return them in the same year, and this is according to IRS publication 17, if you return them in the same year, then you do not need to claim the value. But if you do not, so any income that you bring in from drug deals, bribes, stolen goods, any other illegal activity, make sure you put that on Schedule 1, Form 1040, Line 8Z, or on Schedule C, Form 1040, if from your, self-employment illegal activity. So this is just from the IRS. Maybe they forgot the clause about just saying, hey, nobody do that. That's wrong. But instead, if you're going to, please, we want to make sure we tax you on that value.
All right. Wow, that's very, very interesting. I guess hopefully that is not pertinent to too many members of our audience, but I think. Are you
going to find how this is actually useful for people? Like, are you? Well,
no, I've got something, which is fun. So as you were saying that, I was thinking about a question that I got recently. So it's funny, as we've talked about here a couple of times, I've been kind of dabbling in the world of just learning about cryptocurrency and NFTs and things like this. And I've become like a tax expert which is hilarious, for NFT for Newbies podcast. And they asked me to record a question recently. And it was basically somebody saying like, hey, the blockchain isn't related to the government. Like, why do I have to pay taxes on it? And, that's beside the point. But actually, the real point that's of interest is the onus is always on the taxpayer to report your income properly. And I think that's what a lot of us don't necessarily realize. right? Is that like when you earn income, I know this is, you're being satirical here with the stolen property, though you are reading directly from irs.gov. But the interesting thing, like the onus is always on the taxpayer to report their taxes as properly and fairly as possible. So, obviously everybody does their own thing, but for me, sure, is my NFT purchasing necessarily going to be audited by the IRS? No, probably not. But it goes back to like that identity statement that we talked about years ago, right? It's like, I'm the type of person that ... does the right thing even when nobody's looking. That's kind of like my own identity statement. So for me, like I have taken great care, even though there's almost a 0% chance that anybody, even if I were audited, that anybody could follow all this crazy stuff that's going on. Like I still am taking it because I know that the onus is on me to report my taxes properly. So anyway, that's I'm not trying to sermonize here at all, but actually, Jonathan, I have one interesting thing for taxes is just a reminder to everybody who's self-employed or who has 1099 income and might not have withholding on their regular paycheck, right? Like if you're getting 1099 income or you're self-employed, you have to make quarterly estimated payments to the federal government. And Q4 of 2021 is actually due usually January 15th of the following year. I think this year, because of a weekend, it's due January 18th of 2022. So the date this is going out, you've got 8 days to make your estimated payments. You could do that via, mail it in on the coupon, or you can go to eftps.gov and make your estimated payment electronically. So Jonathan, you had a very interesting little anecdote, and I don't think you expected 5 minutes of me yapping about it.
No, sir, returned. Thank you, sir. So, as we start talking about doing this type of analysis, we're going to try and build it on what we were talking about last week, which was doing your financial audit. So we assigned a homework assignment, and if everybody, let's grab that last paycheck of the year. Let's go through and figure out what our income was for the year. Let's figure out expressly what is our net income, our take-home pay. And then also let's start to aggregate our expenses. And when you combine that with, a net worth sheet, it gives us a lot of information as we start to build on this with this analysis. And so, Brad, the SWOT analysis is a framework that's stolen from corporate America. But I think there's enough here for us to just be able to take a look at the information that we glean from this exercise about our financial health and start to look for places where we can lean on our strengths and we can identify some weaknesses and some threats and see what we can do to mitigate that in the coming months. So as we think about strengths through the lens of what I just described, what comes to mind, Brad?
Yeah. So, for me, it comes back, like, I'm going to take one step back, even though you did just allude to this. We had this getting started audit, right? Or your annual checkup for a lot of us. And we specifically said, don't take any action. Right? Like your action for this week is just to do this analysis. It's to get it on paper, to get your net worth. So all your assets, all your liabilities, your income, the rough taxes you pay, and your expenses, right? So have that on paper. And now it's time to actually look at that, right? And make some judgments, take some potential action moving forward. But you have to first identify what that action might be. Now, Jonathan, to your question, strengths, since that's the starting point. For me, I would kind of eyeball, okay, maybe for a lot of people, their income is a strength, right? Like they might make a 6-figure combined salary or individual salary or more potentially, right? And, that then is a pretty big shovel to start with in terms of, hey, I've got some income coming in. My savings rate can be significant. Maybe I can reach FI quicker than somebody making $30,000 a year, $50,000, whatever it may be, right? So I would look to income for strengths. I think on the other side, you could say if somebody has their life just costs nothing, right? Or very, very little, that can be a huge strength. My expenses just aren't that much, right? The big three we always talk about. You've got housing, food, transportation. Maybe your house is paid off. Maybe you live at home. Maybe you don't have a car payment, right? Those kind of things can obviously be strengths. And then you can look at your net worth statement, right? Because there's really these two different statements that we said. We have your income statement and then your balance sheet, which is, hey, what are my assets? What are my liabilities? So very clearly, Jonathan, right? If your assets are more than your liabilities, if you have a positive net worth, that's a good thing. That's a strength. And the larger that number is, the bigger a strength it is right now. But as always, this is not about, hey, give myself a pat on the back or a gold star because I've done everything great up to this point. I mean, that's nice. That's all well and good. But this is not like beat yourself up because I have a negative net worth or I have debt or my income's not that high. Like that is not the game we play at ChooseFI. The game we play here is how can you take action today to make your life better tomorrow? How can you take another action tomorrow to keep making it better and compounding, right? So Jonathan, I just wanted to say that very specifically. Like this is not about judgment. This is not about beating yourself up. This is about where am I today? Let me look at what my strengths and weaknesses, et cetera, are. And what can I do moving forward? So yeah, that's what hits me off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I think when you start thinking about financial strengths and so we're talking about kind of quantitative as opposed to qualitative measures. We're not really talking about character qualities at this particular point for this exercise, but things that come to mind for me are what savings do you have? And you could look at it first through the lens of emergency savings, so cash that is readily available, maybe in contrast to total net worth or invested assets, which you could certainly work your way down to. But do I have an emergency fund? Could I cover 3 months of expenses, 6 months of expenses, et cetera? How much do I have FU money? These would all things that would be firmly in the strengths category. What is my debt outlook? Do I have debt? Do I have consumer debt? Do I have student loan debt? Do I have car loans? These types of things. Do I have debt outside of my mortgage? And then, you can look at your income, certainly, but income is like what that really means is very relative to an area. Someone that's making 100,000 in Alabama and is a different position than someone making 100,000 in New York City or in California, that just feels different, like what that means to you. And so probably a better indicator of that as a strength would be what does that mean in terms of a savings rate? And you could flip all of these around, so if they aren't in a strengths category, maybe it's a weakness. Like, right. If I don't have it, if I'm in debt up into my eyeballs on my riding lawnmower that's financed, if I have no savings whatsoever and I have no savings rate, I need this paycheck just to make it to the next paycheck. Yeah, I mean, that, if you can't qualify them as strengths, the worse off it is, the more it really starts to actually look like a weakness. And so we can kind of build on that and we could say, well, what do we have control over? And as we get into the next couple of categories, but this is how I would start looking at that financial audit and just saying, where am I outperforming in an area on this quantitative measure where I'm outperforming? This is now something I can feel good about. And conversely, if it's starting to hurt as I look at it through this lens, okay, it's no problem, but we should just call it what it is. It's a weakness on our financial audit.
Yeah, it's funny. I think you were the person who I first heard about couch payments from. I've never heard about a riding lawnmower payment, but
wait, you don't believe that that's a thing?
I'm sure it is a thing.
I mean, have you just go, as a point of exercise, just go to any like Home Depot or Lowe's and look in the bottom right corner of any large sign telling you it's $12.99 or $24. Most people are not paying $2,400 for a riding mower in one fell swoop. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah. No, you're right. Obviously. Just never thought about it. And I think that's, it's interesting because as you're talking about emergency fund and strengths and, just the strength of having a net worth, right? I think that's the critical point here is for so many people, they're living paycheck to paycheck or they're going further into debt every single month. So let's not lose sight of the fact that if you're saving money each month, you are way ahead of the game. If you have a 3-month emergency fund, you're so far ahead of the game, right? If you have $100,000 saved up, you have so much strength and so much power, right? And then you can make decisions based on what's important to you. And I think actually the emergency fund that you mentioned a couple of minutes ago is a perfect example. Like this was something that was a complete rethink for me because I think for years, like you hear, okay, an emergency fund is a critical piece of a standard or a well-balanced financial life. And I just always took that kind of as gospel. But then Big Earn from Early Retirement Now came on and said, hey, do you actually really need that emergency fund just sitting there doing nothing? And it was such an eye-opener for me. And I think because I have this financial strength, I was able to make a decision that was somewhat unusual, right? Which is instead of just having 6 months of money sitting in a savings account doing absolutely nothing, having a net worth and having investments is essentially, once you're at a certain point, it's the same thing as having that emergency fund. Because worst case scenario, I could always sell some of my index funds and move that money back into my bank account if I truly had an emergency, right? Because I'm saving money every single month. So there's positive money normally getting swept to my investments. So in the unlikely scenario where there's some true emergency, and it's so few and far between, but if there was some emergency, I could have a boatload of money in my checking account in a business day or 2 business days. And I think that, again, it's just like a minor rethink, but I think that's what's so important. But just looking at all the strengths you have is like, what can I do that might be outside the norm? We always talk about saving in our 401ks and IRAs and HSAs and maxing those things out. And like, that is such a position of strength to have. We can do that. And a strength can be, we can manage our tax rate. And I know that's something that appeals to you significantly, right? It's like you can actually manage your tax rate. Like it might be slightly uncomfortable to max out all of those things. But again, like you say, money is fungible. Your net worth is kind of fungible. And if you can get a double benefit from that strength of being able to maximize those accounts, like it's a further win compounded on itself.
Yeah. So to the point that you were making, money is fungible, and what you need kind of changes as you go along this game. You can almost get to the point where something that, was a strength at one time actually starts to hold you back from getting to another level. So things are going to move from one category to another as you go farther down this path. And I think that's what I really want you to do. Even if you have to put something in the weakness category, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's going to give us some information on what to focus on. For instance, if you have something in like that's firmly in the strength category, maybe that can require less of your attention than something that's in the weakness category. It's one less thing for you to think about. Like not all these things need to take up all your bandwidth all the time. And so, we identify our strengths and our weaknesses. The weaknesses categories are really, what a great place for us to consider where the opportunities are. Like, right, we've got our weaknesses, we got them mapped out. Is there something that we could take radical action on? And even over a short or intermediate time period, we could move them from a weakness to a strength, or get them out of the weakness to kind of a net neutral, place and trending toward a strength. That's something to think about. For instance, you identify this and you're like, emergency fund, I don't have one. Doesn't exist. I don't have an emergency fund. I don't have a crisis fund. I have nothing. Never even thought about it before. Great. Like we could probably get $1,000 set aside over the next couple of months pretty handily. We could probably use a challenge to get there, and then we could have that checked off and figure out what the next piece is. Conversely, you're sitting on $150,000 in cash, which is an amazing position generally, but inflation's trending around. I mean, I think most people would probably, if they're being intellectually honest, say it's over 5% this last year. And if that were to stay the case for the next 5 years, what does that mean for the purchasing power of your $150,000 in cash that was making, new all-time high saving rate percentages of 0.003%? I mean, that's a real loss of 4+% a year in purchasing power. Does that become a weakness? Because we didn't really think about the fact that we live in a world that, it changes. Things change, circumstances change. And Brad, this is an interesting point. We'll have to come back to this. I haven't really prepared for this conversation yet. But if we think about where a lot of our, the language that we use and the conversations that we have on a daily basis, a lot of this came from work that Vicky Robin and Joe Dominguez did. And they wrote Vicky wrote a book called Your Money or Your Life, I believe in the early 1990s. And what was interesting about a lot of the investment strategies that they were promoting at the time, I believe were investing in like treasury bonds, which were inflation protected. And, if you rewind 5 or 6 years, that advice really didn't age that well because those products just didn't really exist in the same format that they did at the time that they were writing it. But I wonder if, maybe history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme if, in the near future, we end up with tools much like they had in the 70s or 80s. And it will be of extreme value for people to be aware of those.
Well, it's funny. We actually have that currently, right? So I just learned of this in the last month or so, but the old school like savings bonds, those were the Series EE from the government. I think now they're the I bonds, which are basically based on inflation. And the most recent interest rate on those, Jonathan, is actually 7.12%, which is crazy. So for the first time, Laura and I actually just opened up I bond accounts at the end of 2021. We're able to each put in $10,000 and we can put an additional $10,000 each in 2022. So it's funny that you brought that up because I don't think I even mentioned to you that I did that. But I think that's kind of what I was getting at with my kind of rambling about the emergency fund a couple of minutes ago, which is, and you alluded to this, like things change, right? You have to update your thinking. You have to constantly be on the lookout for, hey, what do I take as just gospel that may have changed, right? I mean, it's one of those things like I always try to keep myself intellectually honest. And while I'm a huge proponent, obviously, of index funds, like I am always on the lookout for new information that might change my mind. Like, do I think it's a 100% guarantee that 30 years from now, I'm going to believe as strongly in low cost index funds? No, I don't think it's 100%. I think it's a high likelihood, but nothing is 100%. That's one of the strengths, actually, Jonathan, I think, of the entire FI mindset is we look at the world critically in the sense that we know information is constantly changing. We try to survey the scene. We try to understand the rules of the game and of the world, and we try to make decisions that work best for us in our lives. And like we always say, this is very, very personal, right? Personal finance truly is personal, but you have to understand the world changes. And I think thinking outside the box is something that is of a great value, like this rethink of mine with my own emergency fund, like that's slightly outside the box. And you clarified this, but I just want to further clarify. It's like, clearly I wasn't saying emergency funds are bad. If anybody gleaned that, that's the wrong takeaway. It's having net worth makes you powerful. That's my point. For somebody who has a negative net worth right now or minimal, get that emergency fund. Find that position of strength, right? Like that helps you sleep well at night. But once you start accumulating assets, then you can make different decisions. And I think that's that updating the thinking that is a true strength.
Hey, this is Andrew from the Choose FI team. I hope you're enjoying the show. We're going to get right back to it after these quick messages.
As we really start to think about, our weaknesses, and we start to maybe figure out what is a weakness and create a framework to figure out which one of those weaknesses we can turn into opportunities or what could be opportunities. So opportunity says, all right, if we take action, it can have some impact on this weakness, right? It's where there's a weakness. All right, that's fine. That's the current state of affairs. But through action, we can take this weakness and we can reformulate this as an opportunity and we can grow out of this. And what could that be? Well, if we're talking about our salary and we say that our salary is, really below market value, then can we do salary negotiation? And there's a couple things that, a couple episodes that we've done that would come to mind. I'll give it back to Brad to talk specifically about salary negotiation. But one thing that comes to mind is generally just the concept of career hacking, just generally. And we talked about this back in episode 23 with ESI, Earn, Save, Invest. He was really talking about the concept of every year building out this brag board, building out this list of accomplishments and bringing those with you so that, that you're taking into these conversations, which there's real monetary value attached to these conversations that you need to have, that you can bring those accomplishments with you. And, the person that salary negotiates compared to the regular person at absolute best will get, 3% cost of living adjustments, which in a world of 4% inflation, 5% inflation plus, that's a loss. ESI, this was his thing, and he consistently got 8+%, raises when he did this. And it makes a remarkable difference. There's the aspect of career hacking generally. And then Brad, there's another art just to actually negotiating salary raises.
Yeah. And this is actually one of the most enduring legacies, I would say, of our earlier episodes, Jonathan, is this salary negotiation. It's amazing how many times people reference these two episodes of ours. So it's episode 147 with Tori Dunlap and episode 211 with Financial Mechanic. If you have not listened to those in a while, definitely go back, download those two episodes. So 211, 147, they give very specific scripts on how to create essentially win-wins with your employer where you can ultimately negotiate your salary up, right? So you're talking about situations where can I prove my value, right? And they give just these amazing scripts, like I said, of how can I set up these win-wins? And Jonathan, I was that person with that limiting belief. I never negotiated my salary. I just kind of, I got a 3% raise this year. Oh, great. I got a 5% raise. That's amazing. My VP went to bat for me, right? Like that was what I remember. And like, I was so stupid that I never I never really valued myself enough to go through this exercise. And I think that's a potential opportunity for almost every single person listening to this podcast, especially nowadays, right? When you're hearing about wages going up significantly for many, many different jobs, like people having difficulty finding good workers, right? Like you have never had a better time for an opportunity of salary negotiation than you do right now. And that might mean doing the extra legwork. That might mean even applying for other jobs, right? And getting other job offers. That doesn't mean necessarily you have to leave the job that you're currently in that you like, but that gives you some negotiating power, right? Some additional negotiating power. So there are definitely opportunities there. Jonathan, there's getting new skills, right? Like, I mean, there's never been an easier time in the world to get new skills that could potentially get you a completely new career. I mean, like there is a ton of opportunity on the earnings side for sure.
And Brad, I wanted to point out that when you're talking about, salary negotiation or opportunity, all right, so we have a weakness. We take a look at our salary and we realize that our salary specifically is one of our greatest weaknesses. This would be a lot easier if. And then you just pointed out there's never been a better time to do salary negotiation, but the individual listening to this says, well, maybe I'm in the wrong industry. Look, you can change industries and you can do it very, very quickly. There is a huge demand right now for qualified talent, and the space between, taking the skill set you have and taking those and adapting them to an industry that's in huge demand is unbelievably short. You can make the pivot in a short period of time. And Anita, who did that episode with us, it was episode 297. Brad, she just recently posted in our group, just kind of as a reminder, because it's now 1 year removed, how quickly she made that transformation and the situation that she finds herself in. And I think it confirms the point that if you take action, you can get radical results in an incredibly short period of time. So now her new scenario looks like breaking out of an industry that got crushed and into a new industry where she has remote work. She's making a much better income. She's unlocked complete flexibility. And in her case, she did it in a period of like less than 6 months.
Yeah, that was amazing. It's funny. I'm looking at this post of hers. I just called it up. She said, special thanks to Tori Dunlap for all your amazing courses, especially the salary negotiation one. My annual review is coming up and I'm so ready to negotiate for a raise. So I thought that was especially timely. But yeah, she went through that Salesforce course that you're working on with Bradley Rice. So that's over at talentstacker.com. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of ways to just get new skills. I think that's a really interesting part of like our current world. Obviously, we know about like coding, right? Like there's Python, there's Solidity, which if you're interested in like the new Web3 world, like that's something that could be of interest. Like I actually just had a conversation with an 18-year-old that I know who's looking to not go to college and like, what are some options he had? And it's, there has never been an easier time to upskill and get certifications without necessarily going to college, right? And the opportunity cost of that is 4 years and potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. Whereas like somebody in their current career can learn new skills. Like I think that to me is just so exciting. Like if you have that ability and that interest to go that extra little mile, like you can change your situation. I think that again, like we talk about like the empowerment of this mindset. And like to me, that's one of the biggest things. Can I affect change on my life? Right? Like hard stop. Can I affect change on my life? And I think the answer is yes. And I think that's one of the biggest strengths. You can do that on the salary side. And Jonathan, obviously, we had everybody go through this exercise to put all their expenses down. Like, do you have the ability to impact change on the expenses in your life? And what can that potentially mean for your path to FI and your FI number? And I think there's huge potential there.
Yeah, when you're looking at the expenses, it's interesting. So when we're doing the audit, it's without judgment, right? Whereas a budget, there's a little more judgment implied in doing that. You're making, we're going to budget this amount of money. Now you could do a budget that just says, this is what my life costs, so this is what we spend. But usually a budget is you're making some decision about what the limits on certain things are going to be. I think before you get to this place where you actually make a budget, you take a look at your audit though, and you say, as currently constituted, can I reach my goals? Can I do what I want to do? And so, for instance, a financial audit or an expense audit that has, 70% of your income going to housing, it's not going to be sustainable, right? You're firmly house poor, whatever that means. Now, if that's a $15 an hour situation, where then okay, you're paying market rates for housing. Then even though you're house poor in that scenario, the answer might not be to go find a different housing situation exactly at this point in time. You have a larger problem, which is like the wages you're getting left behind. And maybe now we need to focus on that. But conversely, you're making an above median income, or you're making a great income, and over 50% of your income is going to housing. Well, I don't know, maybe that expense there is becoming an opportunity for you to make some improvements. That's it actually falls into a couple categories. It's a weakness because it's taking up a massive percentage. It's an opportunity because with this one choice, you could, free up a dramatic percentage of your income and unlock a lot of flexibility and freedom in a lot of other areas. And it's a threat because you just don't have a lot of margin. It is a structural expense in your life. It constitutes where the vast majority of your life energy is going to, is just to keep this shelter. And it doesn't really leave any room for you to actually hit your goals. And so looking at like what percentage of my life should go to these various categories could tell you whether or not it's really something to be making a change on. And so someone that's spending over 50% of their take-home pay on housing is, it's trending toward an area where you're going to lose flexibility. And it might position itself for should we actually look at this? And I think we could probably figure out what those percentages are for certain categories. But Brad, you mentioned the big three, it's food, it's transportation, and it's housing.
Yeah. And I love the way that you just put that, right? You lose flexibility. I think that's a critical point because, again, there's no judgment here, certainly from us, right? Like there's no, you have to check these boxes to be on the path to FI. Like it doesn't work that way. But like you said, Jonathan, if you take your after-tax income, right? And I think that's kind of where I would look at is what am I saving? So I have my gross income, then I have my taxes, right? And we talked about that last episode. And you have a general sense then, okay, what's my after-tax income? Plus or minus, of course. We talked about like, do you include your property taxes and that's at the margin. Let's not get bogged down in that. So you've got your income after taxes. What percent of that goes to housing? If it's 70%, like you just said, that flexibility, I can almost guarantee your savings rate is zero or pretty darn close to zero or potentially negative. That is going to be almost impossible to have a healthy financial life if 70% of your after-tax income goes to housing. I'm not saying that as, not in 100% of cases, but it's almost impossible to have a good financial life if that's the case, right? If you have a minimal income and you're spending $1,200 a month on a car payment, that's going to be a problem, right? Like, again, you make purchasing decisions based on what you value. But like Jonathan said, you lose flexibility. The higher percentage of your after-tax income goes to those big three, right? So I don't have a very specific percentage, Jonathan, but I mean, realistically, if 50% of your after-tax income goes to those three, to housing, car, and food, if it's higher than 50%, like it's going to be really hard to pay for everything else, right? All your entertainment, utilities, like travel, and then obviously have a significant savings rate.
And have a savings rate. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that. If you attach some numbers to that, so $5,000 a month take home pay, pretty reasonable, take home pay that I'm sure many people listening to this have $5,000 a month. So you divide that in two. So you got $2,500. And I'm just thinking, like, what does that look like practically? So on rent or mortgage, if you've got $1,500 a month going towards, rent or mortgage, all right. And then you have another $1,000 a month going towards food. All right, that's workable. But if you've got a car payment and other debt on top of that, it blows it up really, really fast. And so where's the opportunity there? Well, to some degree, that's probably workable. We work on paying off the car loan, rather quickly. That unlocks some freedom and flexibility. But when you're talking about that mortgage choice, that 30-year mortgage becomes a big structural expense. And if that thing on a $5,000 income is $2,000, $2,100 a month, then your saving rates is gone. You're going to add food back on top of that. I mean, it's just, you're starting to trend towards house poor. And again, not a judgment, but you'll identify quickly that your flexibility, your ability to make traction on that income, your ability to actually have a meaningful savings rate, it goes away with really just a couple of these big structural choices. You make the decision to spend less on groceries, great, but you got to make that decision every single month. It's an intentional thing where you build that lifestyle out every single month. That decision that you make around what your housing is going to cost is one that you make it once, and it's kind of, that's locked in. That piece is absolutely locked in.
Yeah. And I think, that's something that I have credited always with my own path to FI, right? Like I never made six figures in my career, never. And yet I still reached the point of FI by roughly 35. And it was because for our lives, our structural expenses they were minimal, negligible almost. Neither Laura nor I had a car payment. We were driving 2003 Hondas and Toyotas for years and years and years, 15 plus years. And we found basically the least expensive 4-bedroom house we could find in the area we wanted to live in Richmond, Virginia, which again, you look at strengths, like living in a low cost of living area is a potential strength, right? And for us, our mortgage, Jonathan, I'll never forget it. Before we refinanced and it actually went down, our mortgage was $1,265, $1,265 to live in a really nice 4-bedroom house in a good part of town. And I mean, that was what our life cost, right? Because again, we had paid off our cars by 2007 and our life cost $1,265 plus food for the two of us, right? I mean, it's really easy to get on this path to FI when the structure just doesn't cost that much,
When you're thinking about, those structural expenses, those big three, there's so much momentum that can be made by just making reasonable choices there. So it's not that you never had a car payment. It's that you don't manage the car payments for life, right? I mean, maybe you do have a car payment for a few years. Maybe you do have a car payment for 5 years, but so many people come to the end of the 5 years and the seats are a little worn down and there's whatever, and they just upgrade to the next car payment and they perpetuate a now $500 a month car payment is very average these days. And they have that for their entire lives. It makes a massive, massive difference. If we can, incorporate some sort of, we cook at home, our dining budget is not grotesque and massive. It doesn't double our budget because we're eating out every single other meal. We put some sort of reasonable, dollars proportions in place. Like Brad used the $2 per person per meal. Maybe at some point it's $3 or $4 a person per meal, but it's not $25 per person per meal 4 or 5 days a week. It's something like that. There's some controls around what we're actually spending in the food category. You do that, you make some decision with cars, you drive cars for that. Listen, and I say, listen to you, Brad, listen generally. We've done the math multiple different ways on cars. I think episode 22 of our podcast was where we really did a deep dive on both aspects. But I will tell you, the one thing that you can do is just drive that car that paid off car for a very, very long period of time. We can get super technical, but I will just tell you, like, having that one reliable car, whether you bought it new or gently used, driving it forever and long past the point of payments is the single way to assure that you're keeping that money in your pocket. All right. So those are the big three. Let's focus on those. All of those are places where we can just make some decisions that will last us decades.
Yeah. And you said something critical in there, which about the meals actually, right? So we've gone on and on so many times about the $2 per person per meal. But like you said, if it's $3, if it's $4, it's fine. It's directionally accurate. Right? Like if you're spending $20 every single meal for every single person in your household, that's going to add up to a lot of money, right? And obviously, if you make a huge income, then maybe you make that value decision that, okay, this is worth it for us, right? We get prepared food, it's $20 a person, that's fine. But for most of us, that's not reality, right? If you're spending $20 a person every single meal or every single dinner even, that's going to add up to a significant amount of your income. It's going to be hard to save a lot of money. Right. And again, we all make choices and that's fine. And like, I feel bad, like having to say that over and over again, because like what I want to say is food can be a make or break item, almost similar to the car, right? Food can really be a make or break item in your FI path. It's something that it's the low hanging fruit for me. So if you're looking for an opportunity and your savings rate is virtually nothing right now, or it's negative every month, I personally think, if you're asking for my personal opinion, food is the lowest hanging fruit of everything on the path to FI, because you can almost undoubtedly tomorrow start meal planning, cooking at home, finding great recipes you love. This is not about deprivation. This is not about eating rice and beans. This is about eating great meals that you love and enjoy cooking for about $2 or $3 a person per meal. And you can save hundreds of dollars next month on this. And so that, again, you're looking for opportunities, you're looking for things to change. Like, you're going to have to take action, right? No matter how many times Jonathan and I say, like, we're not going to place judgment on you. We're not going to, whatever, you can buy what you value. That's all true. But still, you need to take action, right? And if you're not happy with your current situation, you need to take multiple actions in all likelihood. And I think for me, food is the absolute easiest one. So Jonathan, that's where I would start. And then you continue to go down. Okay. Again, we had people do this audit. They have all their expenses in front of them for the very first time. Like, what else would jump out to you as a potential opportunity for, okay, hey, I need to cut some expenses. Like, what do you see creep up on people?
I think it's really interesting once you figure out what your core or structural expenses are, and then you move to just other line items that show up on a regular basis, just how many of those you have. I think it was kind of interesting. It's so easy just to take for granted all the things that make life good. And then because it's very easy to sign up for new things and not unwind old things that we're not using anymore, they just keep getting tacked on over and over again. So I really do like, let's really, when you're taking a look at what those expenses are, let's draw a clear line in the sand once we come to the end of what actually makes up our structural life. Like, we need this, we need it. It may sound elementary, but a conversation versus needs versus wants, nothing wrong with wants, but to be very clear on the difference between the two now allows us, all right, these are our needs, they're done. Now these are in our wants category. Nobody's saying you can't have those, but let's not confuse them. And now we can go through them and just say, look, we have all of these recurring monthly things, and they're not really core to what our life is. We don't utilize them. We don't need them in any way, shape, or form. I'm not saying to get rid of all of them, but like, if you notice that it's a bloated category that represents something that you were interested in 2 or 3 years ago, and you're not getting value from it now, let's look at maybe making some cuts there. There is a compelling reason to always start with spend less for the vast majority of people if they haven't gone through this exercise before. Dollar for dollar, it's more efficient, right? If you earn $1, it's going to be taxed. If you spend $1 less, you get 100% of that return. And so just going through this exercise and recognizing that every dollar that you spend represents your life energy. It represents your life energy. And so just going through this exercise, say, what would I need to cut to get to the point where I would start to feel deprived, and then pulling it back. And when you're doing that, you're probably not going to do that on the needs category, right? And to prevent the fatigue that would come with blending those together, let's just be very clear on what wants are. And then we can make those decisions, and we can try to go without it. And if we absolutely miss it, well, we can add it back in, but we do so with a little bit of intentionality. These are definitely still, these are opportunities. And by, engaging in this sort of cut until we feel deprived and then add back, we're making an intentional choice to choose that in 2022, to say that is still an important part of my life now, as opposed to, a decision that it's still costing us many, many years later.
Yeah. And I think that's critical, right? This is not deprivation. We're not trying to just become rich at the expense of everything else, at the expense of a good life. I mean, that's the polar opposite of what we're trying to do here. As you said, like, okay, there is a case in point where you can cut to that point of deprivation and then realize very, very quickly, hey, I need to add this back. And then that's wonderful. That to me is an optimal outcome, right? Because you've determined like this actually adds value to my life, not just that it's on autopilot, right? So many of our expenses are on autopilot. So this might be the first time you've ever put all of your expenses down on paper in front of you. And you might be surprised at what you see, right? Like, I can't believe I'm still paying for that. Okay, then you have an opportunity to cut it out. Like that's an easy, that again is a low hanging fruit. There might be something that you think, oh, I could do without that. But then you cut it and you find, hey, you know what? My life is better with that. And you've made that decision with eyes wide open. And I think that's a really powerful exercise. I think to me that again is a very positive outcome of this of, okay, I can make those decisions and I'm doing it from this position of strength. And, Jonathan, right, like obvious ones are, as you said, subscriptions. We always talk about that. Like I know even in my house, like that's why an exercise like this is good for me is things get buried in a credit card statement sometime. Like, am I as good looking at my credit card statement as I probably should be? No, honestly, I'm not. Like I'm perfectly susceptible to this, like needing this annual checkup because things slip, you start buying things. Like that's just the way life works. But it's nice to get recentered and realize, like we talked about last time, like, oh, I'm not using Apple TV anymore. Like I've watched Ted Lasso, I'm done. Like I don't need to keep paying that, whatever, $6 a month, whatever it is. Like, do I really need Hulu and Netflix and all? Like, no, we're watching one show at a time, and just, again, recentering, it gets you to a place of comfort, right? And knowing that you're not just having money leaking for nothing, for no value. And I think, just kind of thinking off the top of my head, we're talking about opportunities, but that are couched around expenses. Like one thing that came up is potentially refinancing your mortgage if you have one. This is an opportunity of really, like, you look for kind of free rolls in life. Like, how can I get essentially something for nothing, right? Refinance for a lot of us is a case in point of that. I know, especially here in Richmond and a lot of places in the country, there are those no closing costs refinances that, you might pay a tiny little higher percentage rate or something. But like, we have a great company here in Richmond, and you and I have each used it a couple times. Like where you live, listening to this, like there might be something like that. Or it might just be, hey, closing costs are a couple $1,000, but I'm saving $300 a month because interest rates are so low right now. Like, again, this is not necessarily saying go out and refinance your mortgage. We're doing an exercise to look at your own personal finances. If the interest rate on your mortgage is 5%, it's time to refinance. I mean, rates are dramatically lower than that. Like, it's just time to look at this and say, okay, what is my holistic financial picture? And where is there potential for opportunity?
Are you taking advantage of your employer match? If it's in your means, do you have the capacity to make this the first year that you have maxed out your 401k? If you do have a 401k, have you figured out how to see what your investment options are and gotten that into low-cost broad-based index funds, if applicable? These are all just things to consider as potential opportunities. Do you have access to an employee stock purchase plan? That's another benefit that a lot of employers offer, and it might be a way for you to get a little bit extra out of your job. We really should just create like a Earn More playlist, Brad, with all the episodes that we've done. But just if Earn More is a place for opportunity for you, have you listened to those episodes? So specifically episode 23 with Earn, Save, Invest, 10 ways to increase your income with Alan Donegan. I think it's 288. I'll double check that one at the end. Episode 147, Brad, that you mentioned earlier, and 211 with Tori Dunlap and Financial Mechanic, respectively, both around, salary negotiation. So just, keep that in mind. And then obviously when it comes to threats, we'll kind of wrap up here. The future is uncertain. The future is sometimes scary. And as we know, it doesn't always go exactly the way that we would want. And so, market changes and declines, job income or loss, injury or disability. Are you mitigating the risk of those to the degree that you're able? So for instance, market changes or declines. There are some industries that are just going away, or they are going to be atrophied for the next 5 years. Are you in one of those? And what does that mean? Do you keep trying to ride it out and try to figure out how to make it work and just to hope for the best and it'll all be okay? Or do you just kind of see the world as it is, not as we want it to be, but as it is, and say, you know what? I have another 10, 15 years on my earning track, and I don't know if I can ride this ship down all the way to the bottom. So what does that mean? That's just realistic. What does it mean in terms of slowly thinking about pivoting into a different industry, maybe? What does that mean in terms of starting to add to my skill set and figure out how I'm going to pivot? That way I don't just find out what happens to my industry, but I'm well positioned to make sure that we stay in front of this. Those are just things that, absolutely come to my mind, Brad.
Yeah. For me, when I think of threats, I think of like, what are the potential like cataclysmic events, or what are the things that are going to keep me up at night? So this is going to vary for everybody, but like, do you have significant debt? Do you have significant debt that might have a variable interest rate? Maybe you took out, for some reason on your mortgage, you took out an adjustable rate mortgage, right? And again, like we just talked about, interest rates are really low right now. This might be a time to lock in that mortgage rate for the next 30 years. And that is a potential huge threat of, am I going to have a balloon payment? Like, I don't know if these things still exist. I suspect they do, but like a balloon payment on my mortgage that I can't pay. Do I have life insurance? What if I get hit by a bus? Like, that's obviously a huge threat, which could happen. Like, are you safeguarding your loved ones? Another one, it just in that same vein, is a will and potentially trust, right? Like, do you have a will in place if you did get hit by that proverbial bus? That's something that is really, really easy to take care of. Same as getting term life insurance. Those are really easy to take care of. And you're going to leave your loved ones in a really precarious situation if you haven't taken care of them or thought about them in that regard, right? So like that's how I look at threats, is like, what are these massive threats? You said another one, Jonathan, is changing industries. Obviously, that's another huge one. Like, what are these big things that could really, really harm your financial life and just your life generally?
I said, went with Alan actually, said 288. That was incorrect. Alan's episode with us was 338, choosify.com/338. And he was talking about 10 ways to increase your income. Okay, SWOT analysis for financial independence. I hope you use this as kind of a springboard for your own journey of exploration, and that you start to dive deeper on some of these concepts. We look forward to joining you next week as we continue to go down the road less traveled. All right, friends, see you next time.